Hello, welcome to this next episode of my Deuze vlog podcast series with interviews, conversations, and with people that inspire me, both from the music industry, the journalism industry, the film, the television industry, as well as media scholars. So trying to make sense of what this life in media is all about. And today, I have two amazing guests that are going to be chatting with Atze de Vrieze, journalist from the Netherlands, music journalist from the Netherlands, and Ben Swanson, co-founder of the secretly Canadian indie record label from Bloomington, Indiana. Atze is an award-winning Dutch music reporter and presenter at the Dutch public broadcaster VPRO. He's been there for 15 to maybe even 18 years, working at 3 for 12, among many other things. Also hosting the Weird Hit Wonders podcast, which he developed, looking at strange hits in the past of Dutch music and sort of interviewing the people involved and the artists and the influencers and where this music came from. In 2014, he was awarded the prestigious Dutch Pop Media Award for his work. And my other guest is Ben Swanson. Ben is the co-founder of Secretly Canadian Records, an independent record label based out of Bloomington, Indiana, which he started together with his brother and two other colleagues in that small college town in the American Midwest. You may know the label from having put out artists such as Anthony and the Johnsons, Bon Iver, Songs Ohia, The War on Drugs, and many, many others. Secretly Canadian today is part of the Secretly Canadian Group, the Secretly Group, if you will, consisting of other labels like Jaguar, Dead Oceans, and the reissue label, the Numero Group. The label started in Indiana in 1996. It's still going strong. The stories that Atze and Ben have to share are the stories about what's it like to work in this weird industry that is the music industry. We'll be talking about what makes the music industry special and unique, especially given the fact that a lot of things that happen in all other media industries tend to happen in the music industry first. How to cultivate an authentic, real persona or personality in the industry, whether as a journalist covering the industry or as an artist or as a label manager. How to handle success and failure, both of which are many, and how to look beyond what you're doing, what your own creativity, your own craft is, and creating a world in which people can experience the music. These and other stories are what we're covering in this conversation. So sit back, relax, listen or watch at your leisure, and please let us know what you think. If you have any questions or comments, really looking forward to hearing from you. All right, let's get started. Great to see you, both of you, calling in from Atze. Are you in Amsterdam or where are you in the Netherlands?
I'm in Utrecht.
Utrecht.
Right? Yeah.
Well, so both of you are in the heart of your respective countries, right? Utrecht is the heart of the Netherlands. Indiana, very much the heart of not just the Midwest, but I would say the US almost. Ben, very good to see you.
Good to see you.
And I was thinking we could maybe just kick off our conversation to just think a little bit about the music as a music industry. I mean, you're both immersed in it in very different ways. As a label manager, as a journalist, as a reporter, as a podcaster. And what I always find amazing about the music industry is you kind of can make the point that it happens first in the music industry and then it sort of trickles down to all the other industries. I mean, the Napster effect, and the notion of free everything, the 360-degree deal, the way companies and artists or professionals try to sort of control every aspect of the creative process. I mean, the constant adaptation and development of new formats and new technologies. I mean, we've got vinyl and cassettes and then CDs and MP3s and streaming services. I mean, the music is kind of like a benchmark case. Even the structure of the industry, where there's this interesting balance globally between, a very healthy indie label industry, of which, of course, Secretly Canadian and the Secretly Group is a a key example of, and then a handful of these mega corporations, Sony, Warner, and so on. On the other hand, you see that structure being replicated in other industries as well. So I guess what I want to ask you is how do you navigate, and especially looking back, because you've both been doing this for a while, how do you navigate an industry like that with so many changes, so many things that happen there first? I mean, it seems a lot of fun, and you can make it up as you go along, and at the same time, it's incredibly complex to keep track of how everything is moving. I mean, what's the key here? What's the trick? Just stumbling along, or is there a sort of a strategy towards all of this? I mean, okay, Ben, you start laughing. I'm going to pass the ball to you first.
I mean, yeah, there's definitely a lot of stumbling, and I'm sure, like, in the on the sort of label side of the music is probably very similar to the journalist side. I think there's a lot of probably similarities and evolution, especially over the last 15 years or so. I think, so we started in 1996, sort of right around, I kind of call it the third wave of independent music, at least in the States, and there is a bunch of there's a couple previous waves before us that sort of paved the way for us, and sort of had created like the touring channels and the distribution channels and even just as simple as manufacturing channels. It wasn't as we were maybe the first generation of label where it wasn't weird to be an independent label, and we definitely built our company on top of a bunch of pioneers from them, or pioneers before us, and so we got to experience like the crest of the CD dominance, which happened, I think it crested around 2000 or 2001, and then we experienced the Napster revolution, and then the iTunes download store, and then streaming, where we are today. And I guess, like, for us, we've been lucky that I feel like we've always been somewhat right-sized, where all those shifts in the industry we've been able to navigate a little bit more nimbly than, like, say, some of the majors, as well as maybe some of the independent labels before us. Not all, some of the labels have navigated it really well, but some of the stuff you got to move pretty quickly on, and some you don't really want to be the first mover on. So I feel like we've been lucky with timing on that. But I don't know, the thing that's sort of the lesson I've really learned is, never get comfortable, and just stay curious and keep trying stuff, and not everything will work. But I think as long as you're not comfortable or complacent, I think that's one of the big, sort of maybe the big meme among like older rock musicians and labels, where they sort of are very anti-streaming or anti-Spotify and all that, because they feel like the checks aren't as big as they should be. I think it's not that they're 100% wrong, and there is some validity to what they're saying, but I also think they got really comfortable and they haven't evolved their way of thinking so much. That's very broadly, I'm speaking very broadly now, and I think it gets nuanced when you start talking about individuals. But so I just think for us, it's like we're always trying new things. We're always just looking at which way the world is going, and have a lot of conversations, and a lot of them don't go anywhere. And, you know, like for now, we're having a lot of Web3 conversations. We're very much at the beginning of that journey, and honestly don't have any concrete plans for it right now, but we are trying to learn a lot about it, trying to just see where our first best step in that world could be. And I don't know what that is today, but I guess that's the long way of saying it.
And it's interesting. I mean, Atze, how maybe that's similar to you. I mean, I remember from, you know, way back in the day when I was a music journalist, this is, you know, grandpa talking, but that it was very much, you know, stratified, where you had the metal journalist and the techno journalist, and they got very comfortable in their roles. Yeah. And so that's similar to what Ben is saying, that some labels, some musicians kind of get comfortable, and for them the new is generally intrinsically sort of threatening or challenging, and you have to find a way through that. How does that work for you? And when you look back on your career, how do you stay, what did Ben say, nimble?
Well, I must say, when it gets purely to the music, I'm more of a generalist. I'm covering indie music as well as mainstream pop music, as well as hip hop music, as well as electronic music. Mm-hmm. But I must say, I added a part while I was developing as a musician, a music journalist, which is the development of the industry itself. Is part of my journalism as well. Right. And I don't see that happening a lot. Most music journalists are interested in the music, are covering new releases or speaking to important artists. But I think the developments that Ben is just talking about, everything that's happened in the past 15 or 20 years is super interesting. And it's also the most interesting part of music that has happened on a bigger scale. There hasn't been a punk revolution or a house revolution in the past 20 years. Everything that has changed in the music industry was changed by the technological developments around the music industry, which is the entrance of streaming, for instance. And when you say back in the day, people were more segregated from each other in terms of what they liked and what they were covering as journalists, that's exactly what changed in the listening patterns of people as well. Due to streaming, you are not just subscribed to a metal fanzine and buying everything that's applauded in that fanzine. No, you're listening to everything. And one of the things I find very interesting to know, to realize, and I think Ben can probably say something about that as well, is that labels are getting much of their income from their catalog. Not just the one-year-old music, but the catalog from way back from the beginning of the label. The new music that comes out now is battling for attention with all the great music that has been released for the past 50 or 60 years. And that's different than what it was 20 years ago. Of course, you could go to a record store and buy Queen records or the Beatles records, but now it's all available by the click of a mouse, and you're all paying one lump sum to listen to everything that's been released on Secretly Canadian over the past 20 years, and you can enjoy it all. And that's basically has an enormous impact on the way the music industry functions. And also, of course, as you are saying, Ben, a lot of musicians, and not only musicians, but more so songwriters who cannot perform live on stage, but are just writing songs in studios, they have to find their new spot, their new balance in this new music industry. And the constant change of that, and the development and the introduction of new platforms, to me, is very, very interesting and an essential part of my work as a journalist.
So Ben, I mean, you've just celebrated the 25th anniversary, right, of Secretly. Do you recognize what Atze is saying? Is that you're in this interesting position that on the one hand, the exciting part of being a label is discovering new talent or cultivating it and working together with amazing artists that you're a fan of. I mean, that's very much the story of Secretly. Like you're putting out albums by artists that you're a fan of. I mean, the stories of you guys like getting in a car and driving to New York, or those kind of like a great origin stories are very much about being a fan. But then now supplemented, or this is new model where everything you've ever done with the label is still marketable, is still sort of something you have to pay attention to. Is that something that you're recognizing? Is that a way to sort of keep afloat, as you said, as a sort of size label that you are?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, catalog's important. And I think it's an important story, and I think it needs to be dug into and discussed. But I think that at least in the headlines, like what that has been coming out in the last few couple months, do miss some nuance there. Like catalog has always been important for labels, like it just always has. I do think the ratio of like catalog revenue to new frontline revenue, yeah, it's shifting more towards catalog. But I don't know. It's important to us. I mean, when we started the label, though, it's in some ways it's exciting because even when we're putting out records back in 96 and 97, all these artists that everyone has forgotten, but maybe me and my brother, our intention of releasing those records, not just being fans of them, but like the way that we approach them, we're always like, our dream is not even from a revenue standpoint, but that like we're trying to put it out in a way that someone can pull off the shelf 20 years after we release it and discover it and it sound fresh and new and be exciting again, And so in some ways, I think, with the way that the industry is today, it's kind of at least opening the door to that possibility a little bit more. It is easier to go discover a lost classic now than it was when you had to like actually go down to the record store, hope that they stocked it, and buy it or try to order it direct or whatever. So for me, I think it helps. It creates a pathway for those lost nuggets, I guess. The reality is, most of the revenue is going to like the real like main catalog, and that's fine too. I guess I'm a little agnostic on it. The new stuff that we're working on now, we're still really excited about it. The goal is that it becomes, some of our primary catalog, 2 to 5 years from now. So I don't know. I think the other like nuance that gets lost in the conversation is the timeline of for revenue in the modern era has elongated relative to where it was, in the CD era or even the permanent digital download era. For instance, in the CD era, a label, and I'm kind of making up some of these numbers, but just to illustrate it, would make like 80% of its revenue on a record in the first 2 years or in the first 18 months of its release. And 18 months is kind of that benchmark. In the streaming era, it takes about three years, about twice as long to make that same amount of revenue. But the advantage to the streaming era is after 3 years, that tail is usually fatter than what it was in the CD era. And so that's kind of the trade-off. And so I think something that needs to shift in the way that the industry talks about it is, I don't think the 18-month frontline benchmark is as applicable today as it was 20 years ago. And so I think that's something that's happening as well.
So 18 months is mostly the time when record stores used to stop buying new copies for their shops.
It's less that. It's more like it's more like for charting and the way that industry perceives the difference, the demarcation of when a record is frontline, new release, and when it becomes catalog. And usually it's 18 months. After 18 months, the album shifts from frontline to catalog. And I think that was true back in the day with record stores. It's like, it wouldn't really be considered frontline anymore, and they would stock it less 18 months later. And I still think that's true physically, if not even more acute. They might are less likely to stock it 6 months after the release. So that part's kind of shortened. But with the streaming market, albums live on longer than they used to. And so I think that sort of 18-month sort of rule of thumb needs to be adjusted.
How does because we're talking a lot in a way about technological changes, right? And there's of course this eternal debate, like what drives creativity and innovation? Is that changes in technology, or changes in the broader culture, or changes in the way artists develop and think of themselves, changes in live performance arrangements or whatever? But what would you say, and what your observations are? I mean, is music still, whatever genre you're looking at, does it still sort of emerge and develop and gets crafted and becomes professionalized in the process similarly, and new technologies and labels and media and journalists and audio I remember our discussions about audio bloggers 10, 15 years ago, and so on, sort of they add on elements, but they don't change the core process? Or do you see that musicians, newer artists especially, come into this industry differently because they've grown up in a different technological environment and different technological context? I mean, I realize it's a bit of a chicken and an egg kind of question, but I mean, you're both been around long enough to notice a difference if there is one. I mean, Atze, you want to share your thoughts?
Well, I think what we can say is that there's a lot more tools for musicians, both to create their music at home, as well as to market their music through their own channels. When I started doing this 15 years ago, we were still really much dependent on whether a label would bring a CD to our desk so we could hear it. And that's also something that changed my job a lot, because we used to have this advantage over the normal music listener, who would not be able to listen to everything. So he would listen to what we had to say about this music, and to be advised. And now everybody can hear anything they want. So it's easier to create and to also have your own channels to put it out there. And a lot of musicians do that, of course. So that changes the music. That changes. It's hard to describe how it changes the music, but of course it does. I mean, listen to Billie Eilish, who is the most important new artist of the past 4 years. She creates everything she does in her own home, not in a fancy studio. Of course, she will do that eventually, but this is where it started. That's the origin story of her and her brother doing that. And she's definitely not alone. And it used to be you had bedroom musicians, and it all sounded lo-fi, and you used to love them because of that.
Right.
But that has changed. You can create a super professionally sounding EDM record or pop music record, created solely at home by yourself, maybe even alone. And definitely that changes. And of course, if the last 2 years have changed more of that, of course, because people were in their homes, locked away, locked down, and they couldn't even go to a studio and play together with other musicians unless they would do that online and pass around parts they recorded in their own studios. So of course that changes music. It definitely does.
Ben, have you seen some kind of shift occurring here, or is the kind of music that people come up with and how they develop as artists still relatively similar?
Yeah, I mean, like the tools have definitely changed and they've gotten better, I think, and I think that's great. And I think that, yeah, that will obviously affect, the tools will affect the craft. I think that's true in any medium. I don't know if, I think the big change that I see that's different than, say, even 10 years ago, like the pre-streaming era, is with the accessibility of music. I see this sort of slow cratering of genres, there are still genres, but it's like things are just getting mushed together, and there's just a lot more. And I think generally your average listener is better educated musically than they had been previously, because they have access to more stuff. They're not just listening to what's on the radio and what they can afford in the record store. And so I think generally, like you talk to a 16-year-old, and they typically have much more wild genre crossing listening habits than previous generations. And I think that's informing musicians, you know, because that's what they're growing up with as well, and that's what's exciting them. And I think, you know, but I think I think these things are cyclical. I think that's going to happen for however many years, 5-6 years, and then these new genres will sort of, and some of them will be real micro genres that only last a year, and some will be more seismic and last a long time. But I think we're in this really interesting spot right now where things are just sort of collapsing on, genres are sort of collapsing on top of each other, and probably some new things will be birthed out of it. I see that as the biggest change in the last few years.
What I find really interesting in that development is that the so-called high culture and low culture ends of the spectrum are totally gone. It's all now. I mean, and I'm talking about the highest and the lowest. There's an artist like Sophie, for instance, sadly passed away, but she was one of the most innovative pop culture producers. And when I listened to some of the stuff that she made a couple of years ago, and I listened to some of the ringtone music, like electronic, glitchy, actually the cheapest, most commercial stuff that's ever made, that's not even, you may argue it's not even pop music. And you hear that and you think, hey, there's something in there before Sophie did it. And probably she grew up on that kind of culture and took it somewhere and made something interesting about that. And we see that all the time, and I love that. You can see artists on quality indie labels apparently obviously growing up on all sorts of stuff from avant-garde to super commercial stuff, and they're putting it together into something new. And I love that about this age.
It's almost like a hyperlinked
what I do
music.
think is,
yeah.
Sorry, Ben.
Yeah. What I do think is like the same. I mean, it looks and sounds different, but what is same are like these cycles. I think like the 20-year cycle is still very much alive. You know, there's a lot of younger artists exploring the late 90s, you know, second wave alternative or grunge world, you know, like real sort of guitar heavy, you know, like Korn and Limp Bizkit are referenced a lot, and artists we're working with now, like stuff that I found just abysmal back in the day, but I was too old for it when it came out, you know. And you know, at the same time, I think like some of like the retro stuff that like our artists are playing with are like it kind of bleed into the early 2000s, like early cell phone culture and kind of like what you're referencing and all that. And it's like, of course that stuff's coming back right now, you know. It's right on time 20 years later. And so I think that sort of cycle persists, you know, and I think that's maybe a macro generational thing, you know. But so I don't know, I think things always sound different. There is evolution, but I don't think these sort of macro changes or the landscape is, or the forces behind it are much different, you know.
Now we are sounding a bit, I mean, two of you sound, and I say this with the deepest respect, a bit like wise old professionals reflecting deeply about this amazing industry that you're part of. But I also know from your own stories, I mean, like how you got started, which wasn't, you know, necessarily informed by a deep understanding of an industry. It's just like, oh, this is awesome, I'm just going to give it a try. I mean, I know, Ben, you joined your brother Chris on the campus of Indiana University, who was sort of starting up the label and working at the college radio station WIUX. And Atze, actually, I'm not 100% sure how you got your break and how you made it into music journalism, but if it's any like my own experience, it's also very much sort of trying and publishing and trying to get, you know, a freelance gig here and there, and then slowly but surely being taken seriously. And so I want, if it's okay with you, for you to go back to the beginning and sort of like, how did you get started, and how did you make it work in those first couple of years? Because working in in any media industry is very much a story of success and failure, and most obviously unpredictability. So how did you navigate that in the beginning?
I started working in a record store. I studied literature first, and I worked at a record store as a side job. And after I graduated, I worked for a year. I've worked full time in the record store for a year. I loved that, but that ended, and then I got a shitty job and another shitty job, and on the side I was writing and listening to music. And I must say, looking back, those first 10 years, I've been doing this for almost, I think, 18 years. I was talking to Franz Ferdinand the other week because I did an interview for their Greatest Hits album. And I said, well, the actually first thing I ever wrote was a review of your breakthrough gig in my city. Turned out to be 18 years ago, which is a mind-blowingly long time ago. But I think there's something special about those first 10 years. You see that in all areas of the music industry, whether you're a musician or a person working at a label or a festival, or my job, those 10 years, you don't know that. You may look at experienced people like Ben, who knows everything from 1996 to now. And you think, oh, wow, that's amazing. But you don't realize how important those first 10 years are, because they are driven by just the sheer energy and the time you have to invest into what basically everyone in this industry is. It's their passion, right? So I love the energy that young people, say until 30, until maybe you get a family or you get older a little bit, those 10 years are so important, because that's the energy that's just, it's constant. You don't know how to stop. You just want to go on, discover new stuff and new stuff and new stuff. And as much as I still love my job, that has changed a little bit. I'm a bit more interested in other stuff. I'm interested in the industry part. I'm interested also in some more historically based stories, looking back, and not only looking back towards the beginning years of my own career, but also the music before that, for instance. Whereas when I was 25, 26, I was just focused on new stuff only. It did not mean I was not listening to all the music, but the things I wanted to write about and that I want to put into my work as a journalist, those were just the new stuff. And I love seeing young people around me or in the industry. I like those people.
So are you suggesting that kind of energy, that kind of drive, like, you know, and sort of wide open eyes, sort of like everything is cool, everything is exciting, also is the antidote to the way to deal with successes and failures? Like, you know, if something doesn't work out as a job, like you said, you end up for a while in a shitty job, or you can't sell a story to a paper or whatever, or a magazine, but that energy keeps you going. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Of course. I mean, the good thing about this industry is the same as the bad thing. You can show yourself, get experience by doing a lot of stuff for voluntarily. You can get a lot of experience without getting paid. That's also the bad thing, of course, because there's only so many people who end up getting paid in the end because they're good. But there's a lot of chances to develop and to show yourself in this industry by just doing stuff, and I like that.
Ben, how is this for you? I mean, the all importance of the first 10 years, does that ring a bell?
Yeah, and I think that hasn't changed at all, and I think it's always been that way. I think it's probably I don't want to use the word easier. I think there's more infrastructure and pathways, different pathways to pursue what you're interested in now than there was even 25 years ago. And there was plenty more 25 years ago than there was 20 years before that. But I think the thing that is constant is like, there's no right way to do it. I do think the music industry is one of the most accommodating and inclusive industries out there, in the sense that if you just have energy to give, people are pretty receptive to receiving that energy, you know, because there are like slim margins in different sectors of the music industry and whatnot. And people are always looking for those like new perspectives and everything else. But there isn't, I don't know that there's a single way to do it other than just jump in with both feet and get your hands dirty and sort of, you know, screw up a bunch and just continually to learn. And that's what we did. And I think what a lot of successful labels and musicians and journalists and everyone in the industry have done, you know, at least on the independent side. You know, the other path is just to go get, you know, a major label job somewhere or a corporate job somewhere in the music industry and do it that way. I think it's certainly less fun to do it that way. It's not my preferred choice, but it's a valid choice.
Well, you may not believe it, but I actually know a lot of people who are really into music who work at major labels.
Yeah. I mean,
you
mentioned like, and like you mentioned that like people have families in different situations and actually different interests. You know, I talk with other classes and interns and whatnot, and a lot of people choose the major label path because that's you know, that's where they're aligned, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think on the independent side, you know, the only way to do it is to do it, you know, and to kind of be annoying and ask a lot of questions and be ready to be rejected a whole bunch and just keep plowing forward. And it's tough, but it's also like a lot of fun.
What I want to ask you, both of you, follow up on this. I mean, you both mention things like energy and passion, and I mean, it speaks to a certain attitude, right? A certain mindset and attitude with which you do what you do. And this reminds me of something that I remember from our conversations a long time ago back in Indiana, Ben, where you would say that and correct me if I'm wrong, that yes, you're a small indie label from Bloomington, Indiana, and a lot of the journalism about Secretly Canadian is often like, but how is it possible that you're from Indiana? You're in the Midwest. I mean, what's up with that? And I have this memory of you telling me, and that actually to some extent that might even be an advantage looking back, because artists would often associate Secretly with authenticity. Right? You were not a major, you were not based in New York, you were based in the Midwest, and that was kind of also something, a card that you could play, or you noticed that was sort of an association that some artists would make. They feel like, well, these are real people, like they're not in it for the quick buck, they're not, and in part because you're from a small town or because you're from the American Midwest. And so I want to ask you whether that my memory serves me well, and that's correct. And how do you negotiate that notion of authenticity, and especially as you're growing a bit bigger and now you're a group, and for you, Atze, a similar question. I mean, being authentic in this industry. I mean, I imagine also as a journalist, as a music journalist, because there's a fine line between being a fan and being a reporter, and being just somebody who, you know, and I'm not judging any journalist who would go to an interview asking critical questions and also wanting the artist to sign the copy of their album, right? I mean, I'm guilty of that as well. But how do you manage your own authenticity in this industry? How do you keep, sorry, this is a cliche, how do you keep it real? Ben, if may I ask you to reflect on that a bit when it comes to Secretly?
Yeah, I don't know that I would articulate it as us being more authentic than anyone else, but being in the Midwest is a differentiator for us. And it means we have to, I don't know if we have to work harder. We certainly have to work differently than, you know, our peer labels that are based in major markets. But it is a differentiator for us. Like the story with like Bon Iver, for instance, was, you know, when we started talking to Justin, you know, he had a couple other offers by some of our competitor labels, you know, based in major markets. And, you know, he's from Wisconsin, he's a Midwest guy. And, you know, I think there was, I don't think it was just because we were in the Midwest why we ended up working with him, but it was a differentiator with him. And, you know, we did speak his language a little bit more, you know.
Right.
And so, but also for those artists in London or New York or LA, you know, we do have people in those markets, but, you know, when we, and we do have people go to but when you go to those shows, like a LA artist show in LA that has a little bit of momentum behind them, it's like, you know, you look around and you see the Sharks swimming, you know, and you're competing with all these other labels, and it's and that's the way it is. But what we're able to do too is also easily catch artists when they're in the Midwest. Like I go up to, you know, Chicago or St. Louis or Nashville or Cincinnati a lot to see artists, and a lot of our peer labels aren't going to see you know, those bands in those markets. So you can end up with like a little bit more face time, and you can show that you're not in, you know, the New York or the LA bubble as much. And so it is a differentiator for us. It also, like, I don't know, you know, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad, you know, people do associate us with the Midwest, and maybe we don't wash out with some of the other like New York based labels or LA based labels in the same way. You know, the contrary applies as well. Like with Anoni, when we first were talking to her, you know, she was, you know, very worried about working with a Midwest small town label. You know, she couldn't wrap her brain around it for the longest time. Why, if we knew how to market her, because she really identified as like a downtown New York art scene artist, you know, and, you know, we courted her for 2 years, and, you know, and so, you know, but I guess maybe that's an example of us having to work differently, and we have to be a little bit more persistent as well, you know, but yeah, it's a differentiator.
Atze, how do you keep it real?
Yeah, I have to think about the concept of authenticity. I once read this super interesting book. One of the most interesting books about pop culture I've ever read is called Faking It. It's about the aspect of authenticity in and how much it means when people are reflecting on music. And I think about Bon Iver now, about this origin story of him writing this first record all alone in this cabin out of nowhere, and that was such an authenticity story that nobody ever wanted to check whether he was really in that cabin or whether this was just a story. And it was so much part of I mean, it's a great record, but it's also everybody was telling this story. And I think that those authentic stories are often overestimated. A lot of things are deemed authentic when they're really not. I'm not saying Bon Iver is a fraud though, but I'm saying this we find this authenticity so important that we sometimes do not even want to check whether it's really real or not. Okay, so now an answer to the question you had for me, which is how do you keep it real as a music journalist? And that's it's interesting because, as I said, I've been doing more and more stuff, journalism about the industry itself, which is more proper journalism, especially now when we're in this COVID situation, when there's a lot of scenarios, a lot of power play from government and industry and things that work on in the back. That's journalism. And music journalism per se is a strange thing because it's always about taste. It's about taste making, and it's about I mean, people come to you as a music journalist because you know where they can find the real new interesting stuff. So that's always, the more years I've been into this, the first years I was much more driven by my own taste. And I must say that was also the case for the whole platform I was working on. We were more driven by our own tastes, giving notes to shows on festivals, etc. Whereas now I'm much less interested in that. Of course, I'm very much positive about things I really love myself, even though nobody knows it, or maybe I do know it will never break through. If I'm enthusiastic, I will do that. But to me, it's just as much interesting to tell a story about something I really don't like as music, but I like the story, or I find it important to tell it. And now I'm even diving into pop hits in history that I really hated back in the day, and I like that. That's a completely different approach from what I had 15 years ago. It was really about taste. Now it's more about stories. And what does that mean for my authenticity or keeping it real? I'm just curious. So, and I think that curiosity is much more important than authenticity, because authenticity is what is it? It's hard to pronounce. It's nothing. Curiosity, that's more important to me.
It's great that in both your answers, it is interesting that there's a lot of deliberation and reflection in there, right? It's like, rather than perhaps the easy answer would be, I keep it real because I stick close to myself, and and I follow my heart, or something cliche like that. But both of you are saying, well, it's a little bit of this and this and that. I take a step back, I reflect, I look broadly, and I make use of what I have, but I'm also open to something new. And so maybe that's age, maybe that's just, but that the more reflective, deliberate, curious attitude actually is a way of keeping it real. And following up on that, I mean, one thing we learn out of research as well is that, a typical feature of any kind of career in the media is that you're never really on your own. I mean, like, you're always working either with people, like, Ben, the four of you run the label. And there's always people, there's always new people. There's of course, there's artists. Atze as well. Of course, you do your own journalism, but you're also part of a larger organization, a public broadcaster. You collaborate with people on your Weird Head Wonders podcast, for example. You're engaging in all kinds of activities. And obviously, you're dealing with so many artists that you interview and talk with and follow over the years. Now, all these personalities that are all very emotionally invested in their work, and they really care about what they're doing, and very few of them are in it for the the big bucks and all that, and a lot of them are in it because simply for a chance to tell stories. Also leads to conflict. There's great aspects of this, among like-minded people, a lot of energy, a lot of passion, as you said before. But there can also be big conflicts and taste differences and just very wildly different perspectives on what is good and what is bad, and how things should or shouldn't work. And Ben, you've said in previous interviews that I've seen online, how you actually find conflict as generative, as an actually, perhaps even a necessary part of the creative process, that it can lead to new insights or whatever. So I guess my question for both of you is like, about all this emotional investment in the work. How do you deal with conflict, with either conflict with colleagues or conflict with big personalities and egos? It seems to me a huge part of these kind of careers, and requiring quite a few emotional skills there. So how do you deal with that? Ben, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, it can be exhausting sometimes, for sure. But I think it's in our world, it's a net gain, you know, for people for being as emotionally invested as they are. You know, if we were in, I don't know, accounting or running a programming, or that's not even a good example, but something that's kind of more binary, you know, it would just be more like a clock in and clock out job, you know. And I think people are, you know, and you can be better or worse at it, but I think, you know, for us, we get, with our employees and with our artists, you know, the more emotionally invested they are in the work, we get better work out of them, you know. And it's not, it sounds more selfish or conniving than I mean it, but like, I think, you know, people, especially these days, you know, when there is a lot of choice, and people care more about the, you know, their level of passion for their work. You know, I think it elevates the job that we do when people are more invested in it. And I think at the end of the day, like, we're a bunch of, you know, music nerds, yeah, talking about and debating how to release records and what is a good what is good music and all that. You know, it's not any different than, you know, at its core, than like sitting around in college and late night listening to records and debating whether a record is valid or not. And there's not like a right decision or right answer to that, you know, but I think it does, you know, it does sort of further the work the more that you sort of dig into that. I don't know, I'm kind of sprawling with it, but, you know, there's a lot of ego involved, but I think the trade-off is, you know, people care deeply about it, and I want to work at a place where people care deeply about what they do, whether that's on the artist side or the employee side, or who our customer is, you know, the fan side. You know, if I didn't care as much about that, I probably wouldn't be in the music industry. I'd go do something more lucrative than this, you know. And we do just fine, but it would definitely be more lucrative than this.
Yeah. Atze, how is this for you?
Well, I wouldn't say that conflict is a ground tone in the music of my life. Let's say I'm not a very conflict focused person. Some people are.
Mm-hmm.
They like to pick fights all the time. I'm not that kind of person. I'm also the kind of person. I mean, I work for the same platform for 18 years now, and I like that. That's how or 16 years, I think. I like to find new ways to find new ideas. That's how it works. There is, of course, always some sort of friction, which is, for instance, we work as a part of a public broadcasting company, which is part of a bigger BBC-like structure, which is the gateway to the money, the budgets.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always some friction between what we as a platform would love to make and that the coordinator who is releasing the budgets is allowing us to do. So, but I'm in a position as a creator of podcasts, of interviews, etc., to not be fighting those political fights at the top. Somebody else is doing that, and I wouldn't feel fine in that position. That's not me. I like to create stuff that I find inspiring and tell the stories I want people to hear. So I wouldn't say that conflict is a big part of that. Of course, I've had a lot of, or some interviews that go wrong because you end up sitting next to a ego that doesn't match yours and it goes wrong, and that's a good story can come out of that. Mm-hmm. But I never enjoy those. It's not like I'm trying to pick a fight with an artist to provoke something out of that person. I that's not the way I go into stories, I guess.
Maybe I can add some nuance to the question. Is like Ben, you were just saying about how you spent 2 years kind of cultivating an artist or trying to get to work with an artist, and Atze, I mean, Like you sort of hinted at sometimes you do an interview with an artist and it just doesn't work, right? Nothing comes out because, like you said, personalities mismatch, or the artist has a bad day or a hangover, or there's just simply no story there. Like, and which leads me to a question about failures, like and things not working out as planned, which I would presume is a structural feature of the work. How do you deal with that? Because we've just established that we're all so incredibly personally and deeply invested in our work, which also could mean that when something goes wrong, that makes you quite vulnerable because you're so invested in it. So how do you deal with failure? And if you want to share an example, that's lovely. If not, no worries. But I would wonder, like, what's your secret recipe of dealing with that?
Well, actually, it's interesting because you were first referencing to conflict, and that's first thing. I can name you 5 interviews that went totally wrong.
Yeah,
I had this horrible interview with Tyler, the Creator, and a horrible encounter with Migos that didn't even end in an interview. But that's nice in the end. It's a story. Failure to me is when you try to connect to a person. Most of the times it's somebody on the other side of the ocean, for instance, through a screen, and you don't feel the connection. That's a much bigger failure to me, because you think you want to establish something, you want to have an interesting conversation, and I have so many more of these interviews than of these conflicted, blown up interviews that end up in a nice story. There's so many times you talk to a person who made a great record and you just won't be able to get this conversation going. And I must say, at first when it happens to you, you think, okay, I have to get better at this.
Right.
Because I'm new at this, and I have to find new techniques to do this. That's partly true, of course. You can get more experience. I think, okay, if for instance, when you talk to a band that's doing a press tour, being in Berlin yesterday, Amsterdam today, Brussels tomorrow, you have to realize that you're one of the 30 people who is talking to that person in 3 days. You have to think of a tactics, to a strategy to get something, to get that spark. That's hard. At the same time, over the years, I did some other stuff and other situations. For instance, sometimes I do this live radio show on Radio 1 in the Netherlands, which is a news station, but we do this culture show in which you talk to one person for an hour. It could be a writer, it could be an architect, it could be a musician. And I've never, ever, in the 30 or 40 hours that I did there, hour-long conversations, I've never had the situation in which it really didn't work at all. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's great, but it's never a failure. It made me think about all the failed interviews I did over the years with bands, and I think, okay, so how is that possible? Is that me? Is there also something in the way that artists, a lot of artists, I'm not naming specific names, but it happens a lot of times that the musicians are not able to get that connection with you? I don't know. If you know what I mean. I'm not saying it's their fault. I'm not saying it could be mine, but I do know it happens quite sometimes through the years.
Right.
It feels like a complete failure then.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily a problem that you have to solve by becoming more professional. It's also something that's part and parcel of what happens in human relations. I guess that's.
I think so. You can make a great record and not be able to communicate about that in an interesting way in an interview setting. That's totally possible. And of course, when you
have many artists that that suffer from that.
I was just about to pass the ball to you, Ben, because I'm sure that's part of your relationship with artists as well, is to cultivate that aspect. But so how do you? I mean, I'm sure you recognize some of what Atze is saying. Is like you're trying to develop a relation with an artist or cultivate an artist, and sometimes it just doesn't work out. How do you deal with that? What have you learned about that in the process?
I mean, it's a bummer. I mean, what we try to do now is we really try to I think what we've learned over the years is to really figure out how to really vet the artists that we work with before we start working with them, you know. And there's plenty of amazing artists out there, and we'll talk with them and sort of kind of realize that you know, look, they make incredible music and that deserves to be heard and promoted, but like with whatever platform that we have, we don't think we're a good fit because we don't think that they are they know how to project that out into the world outside of their music. And it's kind of a what's that?
I can imagine your position could also be, it doesn't matter if I mean, if the music is important and it means something to me, it doesn't matter how we do that. But just you're now saying that you find it important that an artist, a musician, can translate what they do outside of the music itself. You have to. I mean, of course, when I talk about this radio show that I talked about just now, there's someone inviting guests and thinking about, okay, is this guest good enough for a 1-hour talk? Whereas when I'm doing press interviews on a press day, sometimes it's just, I don't know if this person is good for an interview. I just know I like the record.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it's kind of a dicey thing to talk about because it, you know, a lot of time people's minds go is like, oh, you want to put that woman in a slinky dress, or you want the dudes to wear a bunch of suits and whatever, and that's definitely not the case. But we do, one of the things that we have thought about is like way back in the day when we first started, it was purely, did we love the record and could we like get along with them as a human, you know, just like have a human to human interaction with them. That was like the extent of it. But we have grown to a certain size that like we actually can't release stuff just because of the music anymore. We're not massive. I don't want to like conflate what we are, but we are at a certain size that like with the size of platform that we are, we need the artists to be able to communicate their vision through the music, visual, and, you know, orally and visually, you know, and that happens through a lot of different mediums, but it has to be more than just the music. And they don't have to be perfect at it right away. Like the visual component of their artwork, of their art, doesn't have to be, usually they're like, you know, at a certain level, musically they're up here and maybe visually down here, but they have to have a point of view. And when you talk to them, and can they give, maybe they're not perfect at interviews and maybe they're not even good at interviews, but like, are they interesting enough, or are they interested enough in their music to talk about it to other people? There are a bunch of artists out there that like make great music, but they like, there's this sort of old punk rock notion that like you shouldn't have to talk about it, you know, you shouldn't have to communicate it to other humans. It should just be about the music. And I think there's an avenue for that, but we're not the right channel for that, you know, and there's plenty of avenues for it to just be about the music. I think when we work with an artist, it has to be like, what is the value add that we can deliver this artist? And I think for us, it's like you have to have a point of view and enough of a vision such that we can help you on the actual visual component and the interview component and how to craft this, you know, how you talk about it and all of that. And I actually think that stuff feeds back into the music and elevates the music as well, like in the creation of future records, because we are like about world building, and we want to build a world around each project that we put out. And so
it can elongate your career.
Yeah,
exactly. You know, and
talk to you,
you know, it does
get. I still want to talk to you when you have a medium okay record out. They just want to write a new feature about you.
Yeah, and I think fans these days, especially for as educated as they are, you know, especially because of streaming, they pick up on a million tiny little cues outside of just the raw song or just listening to the song, of how kind of interested I think it is more of a relational thing. It's like they will reciprocate with as much energy as you put in. And if you don't want to put in that energy into like the fans or creating your world for the fans to enter, they're not gonna reciprocate with going deep on your world, And I think fans very much pick up on those tiny cues.
Is it more important to you now because you are more experienced, or is it also something that's more important now when the competition of everything that's out there is so huge? You have to just have a compelling story to tell.
I think it's both. I think it's a few things. I think it's partly where we are in culture and music world. Like there's a millions of songs to listen to at any given point in time. It is harder, while I think with the gates wide open, it is harder to sort of rise to the top, or to get to sort of to rise up even to the middle or whatever. It's hard to differentiate yourself. I think that's true. I think we as a label have grown to a certain size where to fully leverage the platform that we've built, you have to be able to have that point of view as well. I also think the not just in music, but like people want to dive deep into worlds, and I think that's where they are. And you see that, whether it's Harry Potter or Marvel or Star Wars or whatever else, people want to enter a world, and they want more. And I don't know that it hasn't always been that way, but I think with all the different channels and media available to people, it's certainly easier to create those worlds, and it's actually can be a lot of fun if you embrace it, so I don't know. I think it's a mix of a lot of things.
And that's actually, thanks so much for these reflections, guys. But that's kind of where I wanted to end up with, because I know I'm taking a whole lot of your time. But this notion of entering a world, as you say so beautifully, Ben. I mean, and that's a story that I keep hearing about, creative careers in general, and those in the music industry in particular, that it's not just about doing one thing well, whether it's making music or writing reports or being good at interviewing or telling a story or managing your finances and saving your money. I'm reminded of that, what you want to be a rock superstar song by Cypress Hill back in the day. But also, like you said, the relational aspects. I mean, manifesting yourself on social media, on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, managing relationships and expectations of fans. Once you are interacting with them online, they also expect a relationship offline. I remember interviewing an artist, a musician who was very active on Instagram, had a lot of big following, and she said, which is lovely, but after a show, she would often come off stage and just be exhausted and want to go to the hotel room and crash. But then there were these 50 fans, all followers of her on Instagram, expecting her to be as bubbly and fun and interacting as she is online. They're like, oh, now I have to deal with this. So yeah. There is a lot more to just being an artist or just being a reporter than perhaps it used to be. And I appreciate what you're saying, Ben. That, I mean, if you're up for it, that could be a whole lot of fun. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity there, but I can also appreciate that it's a lot more work. And and for both of you, just personally, like, how do you deal with that? I mean, do you have a specific tactic, like, I'll engage with this, but there I draw the line? Is this something, Atze, to go back to what you said earlier, this is something for the kids that still have that energy, and I'll just take it easy? Or do you just dive head in and see where it goes?
Well, as far as social media concerns, I like to try new stuff, but I'm not on TikTok. I don't feel that. I've tried Snapchat for a while when it was kind of hot, and I was like, okay, it could be fun, but it's not me. I think you just have to find your own platforms. I like writing stuff. I like making podcasts. I like engaging with people on Twitter, for instance, and then my time's up. That's just it. And I can say I have to be on TikTok, but I don't know how to do that with the time I have. So that's okay, I think.
Yeah, I think it's okay because especially now that we're like however many years deep into social media, like the established social media, you know, you don't have to be on every platform. I think, you know, a lot of people talk about like their social media presence is like, oh, you have to be authentic and whatever. It's like, yeah, there's got to be authentic, but it doesn't mean you got to like bare your soul on it. I think you just got to find the platform or platforms that speak to you or that feel comfortable for you, that you can find your path through, or that you have an interesting idea through, and you can you know, that can dovetail with your quote unquote real work. And so I think having multiple platforms, whether it's TikTok or Twitter or Instagram, you know, or Substack, you know, I think any of those can work, and I think you can just be really good at one of them, or be pretty good at a couple of them. You know, I think that's enough. And people are multimodal. They'll find where, you know, if they want to go deeper on your world, they'll find you where you are, as long as you're just kind of good at it wherever you are. But this notion of like, I push back a little bit on this sort of notion, and maybe this is what you're hinting at, of like, you know, how do you find the time, or you know, these days you have to be a musician and you have to be on social media. I don't know. Every musician is their own small business, you know, like, let's be honest about that. You know, whether your motivation is to make a ton of money or just enough to survive the next day, but at the end of the day, you're a small business. And a small business in 2022 needs to know how to talk to its customers, you know. And yeah, that talking to its customers and communicating with its customers looks different in 2022 than it did in 1996. But I don't know that like the energy you put, like the number of hours you put into it in a week is different. Like, it's probably about the same amount of energy that you need to feed the sort of business side of your career as you do sort of like the pure artistic side. It just looks different. And I think there's this like myth of like the good old days when, you know, rock stars were like traveling on jets and they had teams to do their shit for them. And yeah, there is still that cohort of people, but that's a very small cohort of people. And I think there's more pathways to success for the independent musician today than there has ever been. And that's kind of controversial because people love to dig into Spotify. For whatever reason, Spotify gets is the boogeyman for why the music industry, no one can make money in the music industry anymore, which they should really be looking at YouTube, but that's another rant. But I do think that there's more pathways to like a middle class livelihood in 2022 than there were in 1996. I really believe that's true. It doesn't mean it's not it doesn't mean it's easy. Yeah, it's still fucking hard, but I'm sorry, that's work. If you don't want it to be hard, go do something else. It's hard. I don't know how to change that.
Yeah.
I want to add one thing to what Ben just said, and also to what I just said myself. And that I think there's a difference between you as an individual and how you show yourself on social media, for instance, and how you do that within the realm of a company. When you're a label, of course, you have to be on Facebook or Instagram or all of the important platforms. When my publication is doing that as well. We have someone who creates images for Instagram to show people we have a nice new video of this new artist, or an important article we've written. For me, I don't have to be, as an individual, I don't have to be on all these platforms myself. I just want to do what I like, what I'm good at. And
Mhm.
and I'm very, I mean, what I hate about social media is that you especially over the years when all these platforms were developing, there were all these new rules. You have to put things on Facebook. I mean, no more than one post an hour, or 3 posts a day, or you should post it
Yeah.
on 8 o'clock in the morning, or no, you should post it on 8 o'clock in the evening. I hate that. I just want to, when I'm enthusiastic about a record, I want to put it on, and I want to post 3 tweets in 10 minutes and then be silenced for the rest of the day because I'm doing something else. And it works for me. It just does. And of course, when you're a company, you have to think about strategies and what kind of images you want to create, and to have one style of images on Instagram, for instance. And maybe when you're, of course, you can do that as a journalist as well. You can be on Instagram and just show yourself to make it personal. I think you should just do for yourself as an individual, whether you're a professional in the industry or an artist, you should do what you like, what you feel good about. Some musicians are really good on Twitter. I like following them. Some people just have nothing to say on Twitter. Don't go there.
Yeah. Look, Ben, I know I've taken a lot of your time already, and I'm deeply grateful for that, for us chatting from 3 countries simultaneously like this. I'm going to put you on the spot to conclude, and I hope this is a spot this is very comfortable to you. For everybody who's tuning in now or later on, like, what is the new music? And Ben, I appreciate if you would mention bands that are on your label or one of your labels. And Atze, what is the new music we should all be listening to right now, or very soon? What's the stuff that we need to tune into? So I'm tapping into your passion here.
I hate this question because my
Yeah,
mind
I know.
goes blank whenever I get asked this.
If you're not seeing that name, you're going to get into trouble.
We just announced this artist, Hatchie from Australia, female fronted, sort of shoegazy pop stuff. Is really cool.
Great.
She's going to have a record out in a couple months. Alex Cameron, sort of a Charles Bukowski-esque character, writes about the dregs of humanity in a really smart, intelligent way. We'll have his 4th record out in a couple months. Coming up later this year, there'll be there's a new Mitski record coming out in a couple of weeks too. From our label, we just announced a Tori Moa record yesterday. That's fantastic. I'm missing a bunch. My favorite unsigned thing is this artist out of LA called Myrna, Meernaa. We don't work with her, but it's really beautiful. She's gonna have a new single coming out in a couple of weeks. That's just really fantastic. And she had a great record maybe 3 years ago with this single. The song on Spotify that sort of had a minor indie hit was called Good Luck. That's really good. But her new stuff is a little funkier and really great.
Cool. Thanks. I'm sorry, Ben, for putting you on the spot there, but
I need to get better at that. So let me practice.
After all those years, Atze, any hot things that come across your desk lately that we should all be tuning into?
Yeah, I really love the slowly developing new Big Thief record, which is something that may as well be on Ben's label, but it's not. I love that band, and I love the power of the new songs. And I find it interesting that they are developing this album like song by song. There's now, I think, 8 or 9 songs, and it's growing to be a bundle of songs. It's an interesting strategy. Beach House is doing that as well at this point. And it's also interesting because it's, the idea of how to release a record is different. And I want to for the Dutchies, I want to share my love for Prins S and de Geit, which sounds pretty ridiculous, and it is kind of a weird act, which was one of my favorite discoveries for the Noorderslag Showcase Festival this weekend. It's kind of absurdist club culture beat poet, and I love this guy. I'm actually gonna call him tomorrow about his new single. It's coming out, and he's embracing the night we all miss so much.
I think
What is
that's
the name?
Prinses en de Geit. I will send it to you. In the-
princess, basically princess
Sorry.
and the goat. That's what it
Princess and the Goat,
translates
yeah.
to. Yeah.
It's pretty much an
Alright.
absurdist act, and I love it.
Well, I'll thanks so much. I'll conclude it with this. Of course, I could now say like, yo, Ben, I'll send you the demo of our band soon, and then Atze can write about it, and we'll become stars.
Yes.
We're still trying to record an album. Can you believe it that the week we had booked our first formal studio time ever in our existence was the week Corona hit for the first time in the Netherlands, and we went into lockdown. So we haven't
Yeah.
recorded fuck all since. But anyways, thanks so much. Thanks again for taking the time to chat and to speak openly about your work, Ben. All the best to your brother and to everybody at Secretly, and hope to catch you one of these days when I'm back in the US. And Atze, looking forward to bumping into you at some gig in the near future when they're back on again.
Yeah. Otherwise,
sorry.
otherwise on the bike, so it's also good.
Exactly. Otherwise on the bike, although I feel I still have to train hard to catch up with you. So take care, everybody, and see you soon. And thanks again.
Right.
Yeah. Thanks. It's good to see you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.